Greetings Exiles, BullShifter here, and today I'm going to be covering the 5 things you may be overlooking when creating your build. At number 5, this is going to be something that I've kind of reiterated a few times if you've watched my channel or checked out any of my streams, and that's going to be building your defenses. Building your defenses is one of the single most important things that you can do in the game, and the biggest of those is going to be, first, your resistances. Your resistances will naturally cap out at 75%. There are a few ways throughout the game, throughout passive tree nodes and certain items, that can gradually increase that by 1%. As you can see here, I have 76% on fire because of a passive tree node that I do have. However, for the most part, you are only going to have 75%. Now do keep in mind that if you do get there early, you are going to suffer a 30% penalty after completing Act 5, and another 30% penalty after completing Act 10. Now, your chaos percentage is typically going to be negative. It's not as big of a deal, but it is something that you may want to consider at some point getting some gear to make up for. However, as long as your fire, cold, and lightning resistances are all up to 75%, typically you're going to be fine in that department. Now, while you may find some passive tree nodes that do give you some resists, typically you're going to be finding these on your actual items themselves. So obviously fire, lightning, and cold, having a trifecta on a lot of your defensive gear is usually pretty nice. You can also get the percentage to all elemental resistances. The only item that you typically aren't going to have any resists on will be your actual weapon itself. However, you can find some on your weapons as well. Now, along with your defenses, when it comes to your resistances, you also want to make sure you are stacking enough life and a combination of energy, shield, armor, or evasion. I would suggest only running one of those as a main stat, or potentially two when it comes to energy, shield, armor, and evasion. Trying to run a combination of all three is a bit unrealistic. Now, it may be where you do have a little bit of each, which isn't uncommon. However, don't try to heavily invest into all three and balance the three, because you're just going to be too weak amongst those three and not really have any sort of specialization, so you're going to kind of struggle. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is you can also add some defensive layering through your skill gems. Now, that can be a cast when damage taken, to where once you take a certain amount of damage, you actually go ahead and cast some sort of defensive skill through attaching a skill gem to that cast when damage taken. Or more commonly, you can attach a fortify support gem to a movement skill of some sort to give you some extra physical damage mitigation to go along with your maximized resistances. Next on the list at number 4 is going to be making sure that you have enough resources. You don't want to neglect having enough resources. By that I mean typically your mana. Now, there are a couple things to keep in mind here. You are going to have a base pool of mana. However, if you have auras equipped, that is going to take a mana reserve, so a percentage of your mana is going to be taken away. My build, for example, has 70% of my mana put in reserve, so I actually lose out on quite a bit there. Now, there's a couple of ways to negate this. One that I've used for my build in particular is a node called Spirit Void, which is going to help me actually leech mana. Now, you don't necessarily need this node in itself. There are other ways to leech mana, so I mean that is one option that you can use in order to keep your mana regenerating. However, if you are relying on mana regeneration, do be careful when you're mapping, because one of the affixes that you can run into on your maps is actually going to be where you won't regenerate mana, so that's one you'll want to avoid at all costs. There is another one that is a node on the skill tree, as well as a skill gem that you can get, and that is called Blood Magic. Blood Magic will make it so you're not using mana, but instead you are spending your life as opposed to mana for all of your skills. Now, obviously, you're going to want a large life pool or some sort of life leech in order to use Blood Magic. I do have a life leeching build. However, I've stayed away from Blood Magic since, I am using that other skill, but it is another option that you can consider. At number 3, don't neglect your movement skills. As I mentioned earlier, fortify support on a movement skill is something that's very common. It builds some defensive layering, which is super useful. And also, just to be able to move through the maps a bit quicker and speed through and kill things quicker. The quicker you're moving through the maps, the quicker that you're killing enemies, that's the faster, that you're looting, and the quicker that you're actually progressing through the game. So that's something that you don't want to neglect either, as you don't want to be moving slowly throughout the levels. You want to be moving through as quickly as possible and killing as quickly as possible. There are also a lot of nice support gems that you can link to your movement skills, so it's something that you want to make sure you have at least one of on any given character that you're using. You always want to have a movement skill. At number 2, and this also kind of goes into what I was talking about with linking Fortify and other skill gems to your movements skills, you're going to want to go ahead and make sure that your build synergizes. Now what I mean by that is you want to have a reason why you're doing absolutely everything with your build that you're doing. You don't want to have wasted skills. So for example, this is my Cyclone build. I'm not going to use Firestorm with Cyclone. It just wouldn't make any sense. Now that's just a specific example, but the reason for that is I'm looking at, Firestorm, which is a fire-based spell, as opposed to Cyclone, which is a physical attack skill. In order to use one of those efficiently, I need to stack stats in, physical to use Cyclone, but if I were to use Firestorm, I would want to have spell damage, elemental damage, fire damage. So basically, it's very similar to what I was talking about when it comes to the energy shield, armor, and evasion. You don't want to spread your skills too thin, because being a jack of all trades in this game doesn't really work. You want to specialize in certain areas. So you want to go ahead and stack specific defensive skills. You want to go ahead and stack specific attack or spell or elemental or physical. You don't want too large of a mix of those things. Now along with that, you're going to want to have, certain buffs or curses. As you can see, I use vulnerability, which boosts my physical damage, and I also use enfeeble, which actually helps me defensively. Now, it's not just your skill gems that need to work together, it's also the affixes on your items. So obviously, if I have fire damage on one of my items, but I'm using purely physical attack, it's a wasted stat. Now, that's not to say that you're going to have perfect stats on all of your items. You're going to have a wasted stat here or there, but minimizing those is key to making your build actually synergize and making sure that you're building efficiently. Now the last part of that is obviously your passive tree. Now the passive tree can be a bit daunting, however one thing to realize is the fact that you do have a starting location. So nodes that are on the complete opposite spectrum of the skill tree aren't something that you're realistically going to reach. So you can essentially just ignore an entire half of the passive skill tree. You do have the option to search specific terms if you're looking for specific nodes to help build your skill tree, as well as, some of the builds that you can find online to get, a general idea of seeing what type of skill nodes other people may be picking up. It is an option to at least give you a jumping off point for creating your own builds. Now, something else that you may want to do is, as I had mentioned earlier, and this is just specific for the build that I'm using right now, I have Fortify support on my movement skill, which is pretty standard. Most people do have that. Something that's nice about this build that I have and where the skill tree actually is the fact that there are actually some Fortify nodes. So the Fortify is going to give me some physical damage mitigation. Now, along with that, when I pick up these skill nodes, it's going to give me increased bonuses when I'm fortified. More attack speed, more attack damage, increased duration, increasing that effect of the physical damage mitigation, more speed and more damage, and more speed for my attacks, more speed for my movement, more of the effect, and more attack damage. So essentially, instead of, what in the beginning would have just been some normal damage mitigation, I'm now actually getting attack buffs, attack speed buffs, and movement speed buffs when I'm fortified. So those are things to keep in mind because they can take your build from being decent to good to great. So pay attention to the different skill nodes in the passive tree. pay attention to the actual affixes on your items, and make sure that all of your skill gems are synergizing and working together. You don't want any wasted skill gems, you want to minimize your wasted affixes on your items, and you want to make sure that all of your passive nodes actually work in correlation with everything else that you're trying to do with your build. Number one, and I think that this is one of the most common misconceptions in the game, unique items are not always better than rares. If you look at any of the main PC players who play Path of Exile and who create builds, most of them do not use all uniques throughout their entire build because of the fact that uniques have set stats. So it would be really difficult to be able to find uniques that have absolutely every single stat you need. The biggest one is resistances. There are plenty of uniques that do offer resistances. However, you're typically not going to find the proper combination of things in order to use a full set of uniques, and you don't want to use a full set of uniques. Not only because of, that fact that it's going to be really hard to find that perfect combination, but also because of the fact that you can't do any additional crafting on a unique item. I can find a really good rare item and mastercraft an additional stat onto that item if I have an open modifier on that item. So as you can see, all these light blue that are on my rare items, those are mastercrafted stats. Those are stats that I got to hand pick and add to my items. That's something that you don't get the option to do with unique items. Unique items may not always have the highest rolls for different stats that you need either. Right now I've run this build with quite a decent amount of success. Some of my items are a little low level compared to where they should be, but they've worked. But for a good example, I'm only using 2 unique items right now. A good majority of this build is built off of rare items. And the reason for that is, it just has the stats that I need. It has my resistances, it has my life, and it has my armor. My unique weapon, it's strictly there because of the fact that it stacks a lot of physical damage. But for the most part, a good majority of my good stats are actually coming from rare items and not uniques. So don't be fooled into thinking that just because a unique is rarer than, a rare item, that it's better. That's not always the case, and typically, at least from my own experience, you don't usually want to run more than half of your items with uniques. So there you have it, 5 things that you want to pay attention to in creating your own builds. Hopefully, you found this useful, and hopefully you can use a couple of these tips in order to improve your own build. Just so you know, I will be streaming tomorrow night. It is Wednesday tomorrow, so I am hoping that some people are prepared to do a little bit of mapping, as I would like to do a community play event. Moving forward on Path of Exile streams, I will be streaming directly from my PlayStation instead of my capture card, which means that the actual visual format of the streams will be a little different, but the biggest reason why I'm doing that is because I've noticed I do have quite a few followers on live from PlayStation who like to watch directly from there, and I don't exactly want to neglect those people. Especially considering the fact that the way that live from PlayStation works, I can't actually comment or reply to any comments that people leave on live from PlayStation. So just so you know, if you do leave comments on there, I would greatly appreciate it if you go to my YouTube page and leave comments there, just because I can actually see them and respond to them there. For whatever reason, when you try and load up one of your own videos from live from PlayStation to respond to comments, it crashes. It actually doesn't load the video, and you can't type in anything. So for anyone who's been on there, I haven't been ignoring your comments. I just literally can't see them, so I do apologize for that. But, if you are seeing this video, I hope that you'll go ahead, check out my YouTube page, and be sure to comment there if you have any questions or just general comments, and typically I'll respond as quickly as I can. So thank you again for watching this video. I hope to see you all tomorrow night for the stream, and until next time, may the RNG be with you, always.